In today's episode, I interview Sammy Rabstein. Now, the one thing to understand about Sammy is she has just as much energy as I do. And don't let her voice be deceiving because she's way younger than she sounds because she is so smart. Today, she's going to talk about the importance of purpose. How can we also change our careers in a responsible way and the overall timing of these big life changes that we're all going through. So if you're feeling stuck or uninspired, this episode is for you. Sammy, it is so good to have you in person in the Impact Factory. I will tell you, Sammy, you have officially traveled the furthest distance for a podcast here. So thank you for coming all the way from LA.
Thank you for having me. It was worth the trip, and I'm stoked to just be with you in this dope space and really talk about some open, vulnerable stuff, because that's why people should travel. They should travel to do those things in person. So I'm stoked to be here, and thanks for having me.
Take me through that, Sammy. So here's what's cool, and I think it's important context for this conversation. Mm-hmm. Sammy and I were introduced through now good friend of mine, Terry Hardy, who I had met at one of my surf ranch adventures, and the last thing he said to me as I was leaving was, I cannot wait to introduce you to Sammy. And then I think I was in LA for a speech, and I was like, well, let's just go grab coffee quickly, right? Yeah. And then I was like, I don't have an agenda. I'm not trying to score speeches from you or whatever. I just want to hang out. And then the rest was kind of history. But this is only our second time meeting in person, right?
Second time meeting in person. We've done some good work together already. Terry is the co-founder of a company that I've been working for the last 8 years that I love, called PTAO, which stands for Plans to Take on the World. And it's a community of CEOs and CMOs coming together for impact and influence and change to create what we call a brighter, more beautiful tomorrow. And Terry's a special, special person. He's an ultimate connector. He's got a big heart, a brilliant brain. And whenever he introduces me to someone, it's always a growth moment. It's always a huge gift. And you and I had a call, and the call was just full of life and had that sort of friend for 20-year vibe when you'd been on the phone for 12 minutes. And that was awesome. And you were like, we should meet for breakfast. I'm going to be in LA. Let's find a time. And we just made it work. And it was a great testament to when you feel energy from somebody else that feels infectious, that is symbiotic, make it work. Just get there. And we sat in Hollywood and we had a coffee and we talked about our work and what we both do, which is be really passionate about helping people to communicate effectively and make their dreams become a reality. And then we had you speak in a sort of what we call a future form, one of these sessions. And then you and I just started chopping it up about our lives and about what we are both building. So here we are.
I love it. I love it. And Sammy, I must say that my initial phone conversation with you, when you showed up, I'm like, there's no way that's the one that was on the phone. Because, I think it's an important note, and I'm sure it'll come across in this, but you're so fast, right? You're so fast, both witted wise as well as piecing things together, but you also are able to articulate with such conviction. I don't know what I imagined, but I certainly didn't. I think I imagined someone 20 years older than you. I'm like, oh my gosh, Sammy is a total baller at, and the fact that you just crush forward, right?
Thank you.
And that's so admirable. And I will say, one of my big themes is go try to get as deep as you can as fast as possible with connection. And you are one of those anomalies that I tell people about where it was we immediately started to go there. And I learned so much about your history. I want you to bring everyone to kind of present day of what brings you into the Impact Factory today, of what kind of has gotten you to where you are. Because also the more time I spend with you, I'm like, wait, you did that and you have a degree in what? This is crazy.
Well, it's really kind of you to say, Chris. Thank you. I have a deceptively tall personality, and I also have a deceptively older sounding voice. And when I see someone in person, they're like, "Oh, this 5'2" little redhead. This scrappy little redhead is actually the person I was talking to on the phone. It's always surprising, but that's a reminder to, let it unfold in front of you and learn those things to catch people up on kind of where I've been and where I am today. I grew up on the East Coast outside of New York City in a place called Bergen County, New Jersey. I went to college in upstate New York at Ithaca College, which is a beautiful place to learn and explore and kind of find your passions. Through high school and college, and probably since I was an infant, I love language. I love words. I think that they are an art form. I heard a great quote recently, which is, I am an artist and words are my medium. And I think that that is so apt for me. I followed that dream to the West Coast to go to Hollywood because it is the storytelling mecca of our nation and a place where people follow that fairy tale. And I started my career at Paramount Pictures. I did a few different things. Originally, it was all focused in marketing, which is what my first degree was in. And I got the experience of what it looks like to be at a studio as the studio continues to redefine itself. Ultimately, there was an opportunity there launching diversity and inclusion, learning and development, employee engagement, and then ultimately leading internal comms. And I just took this step outside of what I thought was the path. I thought it was, you go to a studio, you're a marketer, you become a theatrical marketer, you become a publicist. That is the direction for a language professional who loves the movie business. And it really was unveiled to me quickly that that is not the only path. There are so many paths that are just don't have this label on them of what you're supposed to follow. So I landed in these departments that I was surprised by. I ultimately was able to become sort of this inner studio cheerleader that was leading employee engagement for 2,500 people on lot and ultimately leading internal comms. That was the voice of how we communicated with this employee population. While I was there, they had me be their guinea pig in tuition reimbursement. So I got my master's degree in communication science. And during that process, I had just started my degree and I was working full time. And my father, who was my favorite person on the planet, got diagnosed with AML, which is a kind of leukemia. And he was living on the East Coast, and I'm an only child, and my parents were not married at the time. And he was my best friend. And he said, listen, you can come home anytime you want. You can be here to go through this journey with me, but there are 2 rules. And I said, okay. He said, you cannot quit school and you cannot quit your job. And I said, those are 2 really awful, unfair rules. And he said, well, whether it's this or it's something else, there's going to be a day where I'm not here. And I want you to carry forward in what you're doing. And these are going to be really important pillars of that becoming a reality.
Wow.
So I spent 2 years going back and forth across the country and taking care of him and completing my master's degree.
Challenge accepted.
Exactly. Like, all right, suit up. Now's the moment. This is when you see what you're made of. And the moments that are really hard, you take them one at a time. And the moments that you look back and see what you've gone through, you have a fortitude that you didn't think was possible. I graduated from my master's degree 60 days after I did. He passed away from cancer.
Oh, wow.
And I was sitting on the Paramount lot on the Forrest Gump bench, which is the famous bench. It still sits on the lot. And I was looking at the palm trees and I thought, I'm going to spend my whole life sitting in these gates. And I need to sort of snow globe shake my life right now. I've had this major loss moment. I've had these other accomplishments and I need to change things. So I took a meeting with a company I'd never heard of. That's Patau. And I met them on a Thursday. I resigned the following Tuesday, and that was 8 years ago. So that's sort of the fairly quick and dirty example of kind of my road here. But here I am today, and there are new exciting things coming.
So I want to hear from you. I think so often, or at least in the organizations and people that I connect with, our paths unveil themselves by other people. And, you take some of these critical decisions all of us make. In your case, it was kind of chasing this dream and then kind of pivoting to another place. What was it when you're in those types of situations? What is it that drives your ultimate decision? Because, I see something in you where you make almost a decision quickly and you act on it. And I think that it's in that delay and that instinct that I think so many people need someone to help them, right? And why the purpose and some of those other pieces. But how do you do that? What are you putting that through?
Well, the execution looks really fast. The execution looks fast. It looks like you make a decision and you execute really quickly. The truth is that there's a tremendous amount of backing thinking that's happened that nobody gets to see. And whether it's something as simple as, I want to reorganize this room in my house, or I have this major project that I'm going to write, or I want to make this life change. The execution part should be fast, because that's where you capture the moments that are going to kind of pass you by if you don't execute quickly. The prep should be really thoughtful thinking and really starting to socialize this with the people you trust. So before I left the studio and changed, my job dramatically, I went from a, globally known brand to a company that's an amazing community, but not known ubiquitously in the marketplace. Before I made that decision, I really went inside to think about, what about this is pulling me there? Is it something different? Is it a risky moment that I need to feel kind of alive, that I need to be able to say, okay, I'm at this particular juncture. This is the level of risk I can mitigate. This is the level of risk I'm willing to take on. Do this. And like, what is the downside really? The downside is you think it's a mistake, you change that. But the execution part is always fast. The pre-work that you do with yourself to be confident in how you make decisions and to be sure that you've understood the steps are going to happen way before you're ever in the moment for them happening, those are the things that I think prepare me for being able to take an idea and get to a finish line quicker once the clock starts. Once we push go, we should be able to get to a finish line quickly. But that's because we're not meandering around in the in-between. We're not like trying to figure it out at that point.
Sure. I mean, and I think, one of the things that I'm trying to help catalyze is more of a choose your own adventure, especially within organizations that aren't, lateral moves being one of those. But how can we each choose our own adventure and take action on these things that I'm always pivoting, right? Maybe to almost like an extreme where like I'll give up on something and be like, because it doesn't feel right. So I'm moving on to the next. People are like, Chris, like, really? Like you put so much time. It's like, yeah, I didn't feel it. And it's almost like I'm too resilient in that fact. But one thing I admire so much in you, Sammy, is that you're always kind of crafting this uncharted new territory for yourself. And the biggest of which I want you to talk about, this new project that you're embarking on, which really excites me. Talk a little bit about what it is you're about to embark on and what it means for you and where you want to take it.
Okay. So from the time that I was a kid, and my father believed in not using baby talk. He wouldn't do the goo goo gaga stuff. He would read me the stock ticker while he was changing my diapers. That was kind of the thing. That was a joke in our family, but it was true. And I love language. And when I was in high school, I was a competitive speaker. That was sort of my calling. I'm not great at sports, but that was the sport that I could excel at. So I did that. And then when I was in college, it became like I was a great speechwriter, and that was what I wanted to do with my life, and eventually become a news anchor. And that wasn't a path I took. I took a different one. But this language thread has kind of come through my whole life. And it's not just about the art of words and how you use them. It's also about persuasive speaking and understanding how to be comfortable and control your emotions when it comes to interpersonal conversations. So this through line of being able to express myself and quell my own fear has been a huge definition point in how my career has had a certain sort of trajectory. And when I moved to LA, I was exposed to this charity organization that's called Minds Matter, and it takes the bottom 2% of LAUSD schools, the top 2% of performers, and they get to go to the 6th day of high school. And I built and have facilitated for the last 14 years the speech and oratory practices curriculum. And I would see these students who were so afraid of sharing their voice be able to find themselves against topicalities that are big societal fracture, broken parts of the world, those kind of things you see in the news cycle that are heavy stuff to discuss. But this is what these students wanted to take on, and they wanted to feel confident being able to express their views on the world. And over this, decade and a half of doing that work and watching these students find themselves, I started to wonder if that was really relegated to sophomores in high school. And the more exposure I got through my full-time work, the more I realized that level of fear and difficulty between the brain-mouth connection to put your anxieties aside and your emotions in check, to be able to share your thoughts and explicate them in a way that's really effective. Not only is that not a sophomore in high school problem, that is an almost everybody problem.
Sure.
And I've decided to recommit myself, amongst the other forays that I have in my life that I love, to build this business that's going to help people. And it has been doing it for years, but just taking that big step of making it more formal feeling, to help people share at the highest level of eloquence. It's called The Shape of Words. And the concept is how can we coach each other to be able to share our gifts in a way that other people can understand and that they want to take action. Because the easiest way that I can explain it is most people have a gift. They're great at something. But most people don't necessarily have that gift and have the gift of being able to communicate that skill really well. You can have incredible filmmakers or comedians or painters or business people who are exceptional at their trade, but they cannot communicate how their process works, the way that they help people to get to a goal, being able to sell their actual idea in a meaningful fashion. And that to me is a huge miss for society, because we have so many people that are untapped and so afraid to share their thoughts, that if we can quell that fear and help people express themselves more openly and more fluidly more often, I can't imagine what kind of impact that could create.
It's so good. I mean, and in my experience now that, I'm speaking at all these different places, and, I've done the books and the podcasts and this stuff, and so many people reach out to me and sometimes unsuspecting people, right? And they're like, Chris, like, can you just tell me a little bit about how you've done what you've done? And my first thing back to them is, you have to be to see this all the way through. Mm-hmm. You have to make sure that you are incredibly passionate about it. Yeah. And therefore the tenacity will come a lot easier. But it also, you look at my archetype and even like my upbringing of being the youngest of 6 kids and an identical twin, like there are certain things that I was meant to be not only around people, but to be doing kind of what I do. Mm-hmm. Right. And I go back to, it was in the 3rd grade. My only positive thing on my report card from Mrs. A.B. was, Chris's enthusiasm is contagious. And I remember that to this day. But, all in all, I use that as an example of like, this stuff comes a lot naturally to me than like my wife, Julie, who was a pro soccer player and has done a lot of, Today Show and stuff. But she looks at what I do. She's like, it's so easy for you. Now, when someone approaches you, right? Or you see someone with that great trait or trade or whatever it is, right? It might be a film, it might be a specific talent, and you want to craft them using your processes. How do you overcome some of these things that we either innately have or do not?
And overcome meaning like the fear part, or like
the fear, the confidence, being able to articulate, even introvert, extrovert. I mean, you're, I would guess, a huge extrovert, although I haven't. Yeah,
I am. Yeah,
right, I am.
Yeah, we both feed off of people's energy, and I think that you have to identify with yourself if that being around other people fills your cup or zaps your energy. That's a real thing. But I don't know that anybody is totally an introvert or totally an extrovert. I think people need to listen to what they need in that particular moment, and that's really important, to have a good relationship with yourself and understand what you need. To answer directly around how do you identify something like that for someone, how do you help them work through it? There's a couple different recipe elements. I mean, the first of which is you have to be passionate about what you do and be an expert in it. So, for example, someone who has some interest in filmmaking is not the kind of person that my work is going to be really effective for. You have to have done those other pieces around your calling and then getting connected to it and then putting in your time and real reps on making sure that you become great at what that thing you do is, because then your source material is much healthier. So for me, I'm always looking first at, is what the person does actually great? Because I say this respectfully, but these tools work for anybody. It's just the gravity of which you're going to see impact in your life is going to be the difference. Because I can help someone to communicate really beautifully in a meeting, and that comes from some preparation and some comfort with the self and some that pre-work we talked about around go through it in your head before you're sitting in person, and then it's a little less shocking and you're a little less caught off guard and you're a little less like losing your words and saying, oh, I wish if I could go back, this is how I would say it differently. And it's like, well, when you got to that conversation, that should have been the 3rd version of it. It shouldn't have been the first time. Like, you don't get another one after. So some of that is the pre-work. But my point is, you want to be sure that what it is we're communicating, really well. the first rule of debate used to be never try to defend an argument you don't actually know what you're talking about. And that's a problem. I mean, most people get wildly ignited in an emotional fashion about something that they are not ready to be challenged
If only
on.
more politicians took heed on that, right?
I mean, that's a whole, you and I
Yeah,
can start a whole
we're not
separate
going there.
series
We're not
about
going
why
there.
communicating in the public to people who are only half listening, what that really means. So that's a whole separate thing. We could talk about that at some point. But the key is, if you know your source material really well, when it comes to the things that are going to throw you off your game, like pressure, like anxiety, like your own self-worth stuff that comes up, if you know your material of what you do and what you offer, then being able to communicate it effectively is going to be much easier.
But here's a tension point that I want you to talk about.
Sure.
One thing that drives me absolutely crazy is that there's this idea, and I think social media has been one of the greatest pieces of why this isn't an issue, is this everything is so instant. We talk about the influencers that are on their Lamborghinis with their $100 bills, or, all of a sudden this person has like 300,000 followers and they're talking about financial advice and they actually have no idea what it is that, and then you look at the influx of AI and ChatGPT and anyone can write a book in 24 hours. Like how is it that you suggest people pursue these things in a way that they can truly be that expert in something that they're passionate about?
Well, what you bring up is the dawn of understanding how to use social media versus the actual experts that are on it. And I think everyone has been delivered with this sort of dichotomy of issue to solve for. The first of which is you start with, I want to have presence and I'm going to figure out something to talk about. And that's not usually the right recipe, because you might be great at understanding an algorithm or understanding how to amplify posts and get some kind of traction on it, but you're not really saying anything that's that valuable to your audience. You might be a really likable personality. That's a part of a way that people can kind of design themselves to become a persona within the social media environments, which are really just our communication channels that are most accessible within arm's reach right now. But the people that start as an expert and then ultimately find their way into sharing that with the world, it's exactly the thesis. That's the point. So when you ask the question of how can you do this in a more authentic way, how can you do this in a way where you're going to be able to grow that footprint, it's because you actually have something to say. And you're spending a little less time, you should partner with people who are social media experts. I don't believe that every person who has social media should be a social media expert. I think you should be a person who has something that you're passionate about and uses as a channel to share that with the world, not the other way around. Not this channel is available. I mean, it's like we have microphones hanging from the sky and you can walk outside and just grab one and now you're holding it and people are listening, but you weren't prepared with what you were going to do once you put it in your hand. That is not the right recipe. Like, let's start with the thinking part. Let's start with what is it that you like spending your time on. And you can learn that from social media. You can explore channels that you see that you're attracted to. Your algorithm will sort of teach you a little bit about yourself in a strange way, which I find interesting. Turns out I'm interested in words and cupcakes a lot, but that's what comes up on mine. But I think people really need to come back to some of those human experiences of what are the things that ignite my spirit? Do I like to cook? Do I like to paint? Do I like to speak to people? Do I like, we were talking today with your daughter who's so sweet, and I asked her what her favorite subject in school was. And she sort of gave me what was her own very political answer of like, she said she liked dismissal.
Dismissal.
Yeah, she said she liked dismissal. And then
which says a lot about her as a student,
which says
right?
a lot, but she's an up and coming badass in her own right.
Yeah.
And I said, if you had to pick between math and language, what would you pick? And she said math. And it either could have been she just wanted to answer the question, so I would stop asking her questions, which is possible, or that was actually a place that she was attracted to. But going through some of that stuff that we divorce ourselves from after we're kids, people stopped asking you eventually of like, what's your favorite subject in school? And the funny thing is that I kind of think we should start asking each other, like, what's your favorite subject in life?
Totally.
Like we should start doing that and let people, purely so that other people have a chance to re-ask it to themselves. So that's some of the stuff that I think really gets us towards what is going to be quality content that's out there. What's going to be the thing that I can help people express it more effectively. And it starts from, is there a real germinated seed of brilliance here that all we're trying to do is ensure that you find the right language that fits who you are and how you can share that story with the world.
And I mean, I wholeheartedly agree. And, at the same time, so many people are saying what they want to do and then they don't do it. Mm-hmm. And I think that what you present to me and your full being, right, is that you take action on these things and really quick, and myself as well, right? Sometimes that can also be, a con as well as a pro. But one of the things, like one of my favorite exercises that I like to do with people when they reach out to me, largely unfulfilled with tears in their eyes, saying like, Chris, I want a little bit more of what you talk about on stage. And, right. and the biggest piece, connection, most importantly with ourselves, right? Mm-hmm. And what drives us, and then figuring out, a lot of times these people feel unfulfilled, right? In their day-to-day track that they've now been on. And a lot of times at like age 55, right? Mm-hmm. And it's never too late is what I tell them. And then I give them the exercise of just like meta tags on a YouTube video. Think about all those mm-hmm. things that people go to you for advice around mm-hmm. that fire you up to answer. And, for me, it's kiteboarding. It's surfing Kelly's wave at Surf Ranch. It's being the father of 2 daughters. It's building a business out of a book. It's scripting a keynote that can actually get people fired up. It's all of these different things. And then after they've come up with that list, I say, now, out of all of that list, name one of those that you actually are passionate enough around to record a podcast a week for the next year. And be honest with yourself, because that's going to then dictate where it is that you're going to start going 100%. Deeper, right? And I think, and that's where I think everyone should have a side hustle, mm-hmm. right? And even if you have the biggest job in the world, like it's important that we start flexing these things that we oftentimes neglect because we're stuck in our day-to-day track.
100%. I mean, what you're talking about is just distilling down to the essence of how you show up, because there's a lot of noise. There's all these other things that we can be, and there's a lot of different roles we all have to play in our lives. But there are ones where you feel most natural and most ignited. And the tension point we have to carry with us and be really careful around is how to not take the thing that ignites you and make it such an obligation where it's exhausting and it loses that joy. So that's definitely a balance you have to strike. And I think that it comes from staying fresh and staying current in what that work looks like. I certainly reference tools I've had since I was in high school, but you always have to be adding new ones. There have to be different things that if this passion area becomes less interesting at some point, that's a litmus test for you to start to explore something else. If it doesn't have that longevity of spirit where I want to talk about language all the time. I love talking about interpersonal communications. I love seeing the dynamics between people. The reason is because it's a sport you exercise every single day, all the time, constantly. You're in the airport. How are you talking to that gate agent? Because it's going to change the way your next 20-minute experience is going to go. You meet people. You're in environments where you're just kind of finding these moments where you have to interact with other people. And people who try to avoid it keep feeling like they're unlucky or that they don't have this connection to the world. They feel very isolated and they continue to isolate. That to me just doesn't fuel my spirit. It doesn't feel good to be disconnected. And there's plenty of time to balance that, where if you're a social person and that does fill your cup, it's important to take time and be able to be still with yourself, of course. But there's a balance. And if you consider yourself an introvert and you say that, you have to find ways to be able to say, okay, I can be comfortable talking to other people.
Yeah.
Because anybody who does that all or nothing thinking of, I'm an introvert, I can't go there, there's a whole huge section of the world and the life experience that's offered to them that they're missing. And the same thing that goes for an extrovert that says, I'm out every single night, I'm on the phone every single minute. The question is, can you find stillness and peace in being by yourself too? Like they're both really, really important.
Yeah.
So I think it's a balance.
100. Yeah. I mean, and one of the things that I think you bring up, put into application, is what I call irresponsible reinvention. And I mean, I'm probably an example of that. I've spent all of my life in marketing.
Right.
And I had convinced myself that, I hate marketing, right? I'm not going to do this anymore. Yeah. And now a year in to whatever this is, I'm like, wait, I actually really like it. Like I like it's just that because of certain situations and where I was like, oh no, I'm going to do something way over here. And I think that's one thing that I want to encourage people to take action on, which is be responsible to the things that you are currently an expert in before you ditch it for something that you think you want to pursue because it's a passion of yours.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's a lot of sayings, there's all these sort of slogans around how people are supposed to run their life. Like, well, go head first in the deep end. And it's like, well, how about you have a risk adverse, way to navigate the world too? Like there are ways to balance these things. You can explore something without burning the whole house down figuratively
just
and
burning
then
the
starting
boats
again. Like you don't need to do that. I think the curiosity of thought is the thing that I am most attracted to in other people. People who like to explore the way the brain works and the way that we get ignited by things and the way we find passion and interest in certain areas and that they're always learning something new. I mean, it was like 6 weeks ago and the world and the news cycle is in such a heinous, difficult place that it can make you feel very out of control and very sad and frankly helpless, even though all of us have so much influence and opportunity to make change, that I said to myself one Sunday afternoon, I was like, I'd really like to do something for my soul. So when I want to do that, I try to cook, I try to garden. I had a minor in sculpture when I was in college, so I try to make art when I can. And sculpture with a potter's wheel is a little hard to do in my house right now, so I can't do that. But I thought, let me see if I can teach myself how to crochet. So I went to the art store and I bought a couple of the things and I sat down on my couch and I popped on a YouTube video and I taught myself how to do this. And it wasn't about making a baby blanket, which, yes, that was the ultimate outcome. But it was about the fact that I reminded myself that at 35 years old and at feeling like I'm continuing to form as the person that I am, the brain has opportunity to learn something new. And that exercise of being creative and teaching yourself something, it does a tremendous amount for your self-worth, for your ability to understand how to navigate other things that come in your path, for your problem solving, for your patience, for your fortitude. These are all like really important translatable skills that I was just sitting on a couch with some yarn, seeing if I could make my friends a baby blanket because we have a baby coming in our friend circle. So
that's awesome.
But that's the key. It's like stay curious, stay creative, and try something new, even if it feels like a silly arts and crafts moment. It's not about that. It's about what's going on for your brain when you try to do something brand new.
And I think it's like, there's been studies done on like the most important thing in your day-to-day routine is like making your bed, like that progress of whether it be crocheting, making your bed in the morning, like is so important. But then also this concept of neuroplasticity, right? Yes. Like how can we actually make yourself be uncomfortable and without throwing 9 million cliches out there, there's a truth and validated data behind what it is that we all need to be practicing more of, right? So what do you tell the person that just feel like they are totally stuck, right? They, what I hear a lot, they hate their job. They lack kind of fulfillment in their life and a lot of times connection. Like, where is it that you encourage people to start the journey versus kind of what we've been talking about, like almost ready to take it on? Yeah. And I always say, I'm really good. I'm horrible at broken. I mean, I'm okay at broken humans, right? But like, I'm like, there are experts for that. I'm good when you're at a 6 out of 10 and ready to rock and roll and move fast. I'm your guy, right? But the 1 through 6, there's other resources that I encourage them to go after. What do you tell those people that come to you and are kind of that 1 to 6?
So we'll use it as like a scenario so they can give it some tangibility. Let's say there's a person who works in accounting at a television network and they don't love accounting, but they love the way that TV and film is scored. They love the music that goes behind content. That's their passion area. They may need to stay an accountant for a little while because that pays their bills and that's a place they have a reputation and they got training in it and that's what they do. And even if they don't love it, that's what they do in part of how their brain works. That's part of their hours that are spent and that's fine. What I tell people who are in this setting, and this works for people who are either employed or want to get new employment or want to find their first job, it doesn't matter who they are. I teach people to create systems as if you already have a channel of this. And that means things like you start an unpublished blog and you go through the practice of spending hours researching and developing this particular passion into a skill. Because there's a very big difference between a passion and a skill. Passion is something that I love. A skill is something that I've spent hours in fine-tuning to be great at this thing that I love. They're two different things. So if you are passionate about the scores that go behind TV and film, and you love that music and you want to understand more about it, then I tell people, okay, pick a year between 1999 and 2022, any of those years. Pick a year, look at the Academy Awards, and look who won Best Original Score. And now take a set of those years and say, okay, here are the different people who won score that year, and here's their library of IP that they've created, and watch all of them. And every time you watch one, if you love Trent Reznor, watch the movies that he's been a part of, and then write one paragraph about it. And it's like very layman's easy stuff. But the reason I tell people to do it is do that for 3 months. And after 90 days has elapsed, look at what you've created. If you have done this and you have this document that you love that's got like a title and then the film movie and then who the person was that scored it and then like your synopsis of what you thought, and then you're starting to see a bunch of these different pieces and you're drawing threads between them and you're drawing themes, you're understanding people's styles, that means you should move to the next step and exploring this is something that you want to do professionally.
I love it.
But if it's not, if 90 days has elapsed and you've watched 3 of the movies and you never wrote the paragraphs, you are not prepared to make a change in this part of your life. And that's okay. But that means that there's something else we need to work on. That means that there's either your discipline is not quite right or you're not organized enough for taking this on. I believe that the time commodity is flexible because people get done what they want to get done. You know, I have a lot of friends who say to me, your schedule's really crazy, and somehow you come home from these trips and like you're still cooking dinner for 12 of our friends, and you have people in the house and the house looks neat. Like, how are you doing this? And the answer is I spend time making my life run as fluidly as I can so that I have as much space as I can to do all the different things that I want to do.
I love it.
But you have to stay that organized. And the key with what I was just talking about is you have to identify if this passion is really going to stay something that you just love or something that you actually want to do. Because they're not always the same.
Totally. And sometimes when you're doing it, you're like, I kind of got that done. And I don't know, like,
you might just like watching movies.
Yeah.
You may not need to like research scores and have that become a thing that you become a professional critic on. Like, that may not be the answer. But the activity is healthy. You know, this is productive activity. This is less sedentary, less stuck behavior. The goal here and the real thing that we're circling around is what is an action you can take to try to move yourself one iota away from being as stuck as you feel in this moment.
So I've got what could be a controversial question, but I don't think it is. And, you know, I'll sometimes hear from people saying like, actually this happened as I was interviewing for Save Your Asks, and you know, one of my big pieces that I was talking to this woman about was life being a ruthless pursuit of passions. Sure. And she was like, she was like, time out, Chris. Like, my parents were both immigrants, right? And they both worked in factories. Do you think they had any time in their day to day to pursue any one of their passions? Right. Absolutely not. It was, you know, you look at what is probably comprised of a large percentage of the population that they don't have the resources, the money, the capacity to do these things, right? Mm-hmm. It's usually the privileged few that do.
100%.
How does money play in all of this? And what solutions do you have to overcome some of those headwinds?
Listen, life is an extremely expensive proposition. Privilege comes, there's a reason it's called privilege. It's a wildly unfair, both the systems around us are broken, and I said it this way differently in another conversation. They're not broken, they work really well for the people who built them. Mm-hmm. But they are not equitable and they are broken, and there is none of this is to be said that it's easy to say something like, oh, well, put some more time aside, and while you're working your 2 jobs and taking care of your kids and trying to clean your house and trying to get your parent to a doctor's appointment, all these things that people carry with them that, oh, you can just find this extra time to like explore something that you're passionate about. I think it's really, really hard to do in general, of kind of a pivot, a breakthrough moment, a change to what the something that is going in a certain direction will continue going in that direction. To change its course is very, very hard to do. So to your point about money and the relationship with money and how you use things to move yourself forward, I believe very seriously in having financial literacy and having people understand what money is meant to be used for and how to properly understand what your debt to credit profile really looks like as an individual. And the reason for understanding that is because, one, we are not taught these things in school, and we should be. I don't know the last time you used geometry very often, but last I checked, I wish somebody would have talked more about what it means to file your taxes properly. That's important. But the point I'm getting to is when resources is a part of the equation, and it is for everybody. It is for everybody. It needs to be a part of the equation, regardless of the level. It becomes less of a problem for different levels, of course. You and I both have a lot of friends where that's never a question part of it, and you and I have certain questions about it. And then we have a lot of other friends who it is the biggest thing that they need to solve for most of the time. When it comes to, depending on the size of factor it is, in whatever it is you're trying to solve for, I believe in scrappiness. I believe in you don't need to over-invest in something that you're not ready to see the dividends from or the risk of that loss. So, for example, we'll take it back to crochet for a second here. A very sexy area to talk about. Instead of buying every single supply you could possibly need for the hobby of crochet, which is, by the way, a very inexpensive hobby, but instead of buying all of those things, you need to take a toe into the water to see if this is the right place to double down. And that goes the same way for maybe you don't quit your full-time job that has healthcare from a company that you can't stand and you don't love the people you work with and you're not sure how you feel about those things. If that's your scenario, you do have to balance how do I survive with how do I thrive. You have to pay your bills. You have to be able to buy groceries. Those are important things that are just going to fuel your life. Because when those things become harder, the stress and the cortisol level goes so high that creative energy comes way down. You go into, I need to make it through this month, not I can dream about what's happening next month. Like that, those two things all of a sudden get quickly divorced, and that latter one is not even on the table. So I think when it comes to money, there's a few things I think are really, really important for people. The first of which is understanding and being financially literate is critical. And what I mean by that is, have you ever spent time with a financial advisor to plan out what your goals are? And if you haven't, they would love to meet with you. It doesn't matter what you have or don't have. There are plenty of people who want to be able to educate you on financial instruments and products that are out there that can be how you save. Understanding compound interest is really important because that is how your biggest commodity is time. And the sooner you have these conversations to understand how to chart for your future, the more likely you have an opportunity to have those resources available to you at different junctures through your life when you're going to need them. So I think that when the money conversation is concerned, if it's a short-term solve that we're looking for, if you have the time and space to do it, you can take on a side hustle. I have absolutely zero judgment about anything anyone wants to do that helps them put cash into their family circle, into their pocket. And by the way, I mean this on a legal front. Anything they want to do that is legal and above the line, of course. But I like hustle. I like being around people who have hustle. I appreciate that if you're solving for something, you're like, hey, I really want to have a podcast, but I can't afford to buy the equipment. Okay, let's start with things like, have you gone on Facebook Marketplace to see if there's somebody who's maybe closing their studio and wants to do a good deed for somebody else? Have you explored if there's another friend who also wants to do this? Maybe you guys can go halfsies on something. And then if one of you is really into it, maybe you figure it out. Like there is not just one road to get to these things. So when it comes to the part around privilege and money and what opens those doors for these pieces to come in, I like coming back to being really creative. I like coming back to exhausting all of the options we've had before you even have to really start putting a spend against something.
I love it. And okay, so I want to pivot for a second.
Great.
You're surrounded by arguably some of the most influential people in the world, some of them A-list celebrities, etc. One thing that I really appreciate about you is your ability to get to that place of authentic connection pretty quickly.
Yeah.
What tactics do you use as you're hobnobbing with the who's who, but then also you're always with these different kind of audiences? Yeah. How do you do it?
Well, they are people, and it would be nice for them to be reminded of that sometimes. Right. And most of them are most attracted to people who don't treat them like they're Martians. These are just people. We are all just people. It doesn't matter who it is. I was raised in a fashion where no matter who the person was that you were connecting with, whether it was somebody who, was the doorman at the apartment building you went in and out of every single day, I know him on a first name basis. I mean, I knew every single security guard at Paramount, and I knew every single person sitting in the C-suite. Like, these are all just human beings. So the first tactic and the most important one is you have to be really comfortable with yourself, because if you're comfortable, the people around you are comfortable, and that starts a good vibe. That starts a good relationship. And secondly, while it's lovely to be hospitable to people around you, and you can ask someone if they need something, you don't need to make yourself feel really small because there's somebody else here who has such a big presence or an incredible reputation.
Right.
All of the people that I've had the pleasure of crossing paths with at all of their different degrees of influential nature, at the core thing they all have in common is they'd really love to just have a sense of normalcy. They'd really love to just be able to connect in an authentic way. And the thing that refreshes them when we get to discuss any of the multitude of topics that we go through, whether it's about leadership or business evolution or any of those things, they just appreciate honest feedback. They appreciate candor. Your delivery is really going to matter because, influential people have a lot of noise around them, and you need to say something that is different and interesting enough without it seeming trite and like it doesn't make any sense. So you got to kind of balance that where you can be like, have you thought about bluebirds? And the person's like, what does that mean? That's not going to work. But you can be versed in what you're talking about. And it comes back to know your source material, know yourself, and engage with people in a way that feels really authentic.
And let's get tactical. So what are your go-tos when you're trying to get to that place of connection? I mean, which is one of my favorite games. And I always picture myself at that round table, right? Whether it's a nonprofit fundraiser or, it might be with coworkers. And you're like, okay, you know what everyone's kids' ages and names are. And you're like, oh, like, when's this going to be over? Right. And I'm like, all right, who wants to play the question game? And everyone's always like, okay, what's he talking about? And then, I go into, and I learned this from Bart Foster, a good friend of mine, but it's like, all right, what's the greatest gift you've ever been given and why? And, if you're stuck on a plane and tomorrow morning, you can go anywhere in the world, you're stuck on a plane, first class, you can pick who your seatmate is going to be. It can't be someone that is dead, a family member, and or a friend. It needs to be someone. And where are you going and who are you bringing, right? Like, so, and then you start like getting into these conversations and learning so much about those other people, which I do truly believe curiosity is the difference between connecting and networking, right? And it's when you start getting curious in those things and hearing these amazing answers from the most unsuspecting people that you're like, that was so much fun, right? So what are some of your go-tos?
I mean, I'm going to take it a step back. Sure. Because you immediately assume that people are comfortable introducing themselves at this table. I'm going to take it to the level where you have to go to this thing that you've been dreading all week and you've been sweating all day, that there is your spouse or your friend has invited you to this charity gala or you're going with work and you have to sit at a table and there's going to be 10 other people at this table who are strangers to you, and you've been obsessing about this so much that you have no idea what was just said on the conference call you're on because you're really already worrying about what you have to do tonight. I'm going to take it for that person.
Okay, let's do it.
So you go into this environment, you sit at the table, as silly and flippant and stupid as this sounds, you must make eye contact, have a proper handshake, look the person next to you in the eye and say, hi, and say your name. When I meet someone, I genuinely smile from my heart. I look at them, I shake their hand and say, hi, I'm Sammy. It's so nice to meet you. But I mean it. You have to mean it. People may not always be able to identify bullshit, but their guts can. So you have to be authentically happy to be there. And if you are miserable to be there, do your best to get out of this because you shouldn't be there. If you are going to be miserable and be there, it's going to be awful propagating stuff around you. So you want to be, one, actively choose joy going in. You're going, you're doing this, let's make it a good experience, because there's a Buddhist philosophy of actively choosing happiness over suffering every moment of every day. You can see this as an obligation and a thing you don't want to go to, or you can see this as another experience that you're going to have, and you're going to go and you're going to have a good time. So the first thing is, let's walk in with a decent attitude before we piss off ourselves and everybody else around us. The second thing is, introduce yourself to the people around you in a way that feels authentic and present and meaningful and like you are actually paying attention. If you are looking at someone and you are connected with them, do not be looking over their shoulder at something else. They can feel it. You can feel it. It's not a good vibe. It's a awful trait to have. Like, you shouldn't do that. You should give someone your attention in that moment, and that's where you should be. When you start to engage with people, then you've kind of like broken through we're not totally strangers now. Now, what I believe is take a hop from being not totally strangers to like sort of casual friends quickly. Because if there's something on the table, be like, oh, is that butter over there? Like, is that the butter? Like, oh, okay, cool. Could you pass it? Like, just treat it as if you now know this person. You just met them. You now know them. You don't need to ask them their social security number, but you can treat them like this is another human sitting at this table with you. They know you just as well as you know them, which is not well. So, like, everybody's uncomfortable. And just know that when you get really clear on that you're just trying to connect and you're just trying to be open, people start to mirror you back. If you're really closed and you feel negative, you're like, hey, nice to meet you. Like, nobody wants to be around that. That's not attractive. That doesn't feel vivacious and fun. And it doesn't mean you have to be the light of the party and be super loud. You can have micro moments of joy with somebody and be authentic, and they will enjoy you back. So I think the key is, yes, you can get to things like a question game. And that's when people always hope for someone like you and maybe someone like me to be at their table at an event like this.
Oh my gosh, you and I have to put ourselves in a scenario where we're at a table together. Please, Sammy.
We're either going to have 9 more friends or people that are like, get me out of this table. These two are like hosting an event within this event. But I think the key is that you got to be, first, choose joy so your vibe is better. And second, be authentic when you meet people. And third, now just kind of like lean into the fact that we're all going through this experience. It's probably everybody's first time at this gala. They also don't know what's going on. So just explore it together and keep it light. And if you find yourself getting really anxious and uncomfortable because you're in a social setting, and the amount of people that have social anxiety is a lot higher quantity than people realize.
Sure.
It is so scary for a lot of people to walk into somewhere by themselves, to travel by themselves, to go to an event where they don't know anybody. That is terrifying for most people. But you have to remember, it's also scary for a lot of other people there. And if you say something like, hey, it's nice to meet you, I'm Sammy, and somebody responds back and you say, you know what, I don't know anybody here. I'm so happy we've had a moment to connect. This was really nice. I have never met someone who was like, yeah, goodbye. Like, nobody ever does that. So, and if they do, it'll be a good story. You can tell at some point. So,
I love it. All right. I'm going to ask you one of my favorite questions
Sure.
to ask anyone that's sitting in the chair that you're in.
Yes.
And it's, what's your dream? Like, what is that thing? You've done so much in a fairly short period of time, Sammy, right? What's your dream? What is it that you ultimately kind of feel that driving force around?
Well, I told you that I went to school to be a news anchor, and I ultimately found out that news anchors read a teleprompter, and that was very disappointing because I thought they were just, proliferating their thoughts into the world and kind of being the town criers of the new world of communication, where they could share what was going on in the world around us. And that wasn't necessarily the case for a lot of people. So I realized that helping people to express themselves effectively is definitely the passion. And I think the dream is in finding environments where I can do that and other people can learn from it. So whether that ends up being its own, and whether it ends up being a show or whatever that means, I don't know. But the dream is to continue to stay as ignited as I feel today. And I don't think that is always a tangible answer to the dream is X. The dream is only get to here. But I love that. I want to feel as ignited and grateful as I feel today. I've been through a lot of really difficult things. I've lost a lot of people. I've overcome a lot of hardships. I've been through moments that are really formative in how I show up as a human being. And staying steeped in gratitude is not lip service to me. There's a lot of people who would be like, I write in my gratitude journal every day. And it's like, that's great, but do you believe what you're writing, or are you doing this just to go through the motions?
Sure.
And I live it very differently. No matter what is going on, I have to find some inkling of gratitude for it. I want to stay positive. I want to stay joyful. So the dream is to not find myself lost without those feelings, because it's been pretty effective to this point, and I'd love to be able to share it with other people so that they can have that impact too. So
how can people get in touch with you, Sammy? Can you?
Well, there's a couple places, and I'm sure we'll drop them on this. But you can look me up personally on Instagram. It's at SBR14. You can look up the new business foray, which is underscore the shape of words on Instagram. Or
I'm your first follower, by the way.
You are, Chris. It's not
Leading
even
into
open
this.
yet. It wasn't even released yet. You want to be my first follower, but it is there so that I can have the handle so that I can start to lovingly step into the space of creation. TheShapeOfWords.net is coming early in 2024.
Awesome.
I chose a .net because I think we should have a movement to bring .net
I like
back.
it.
I'm just putting it out there.
I
I
like
like a .net. But you can get in touch with me in either of those ways. You can certainly reach out to Chris and get in touch with me as well. But the key here is that I just want people to know the things that we all feel are so unattainable. This is just, they're long journeys, but just start them. Just start them and keep moving.
I love it. And all right, so I want to leave everyone with some sort of resource.
Sure.
So you are very well read. You move very fast. What is your go-to resource for people that are seeking the same sort of kind of change and joy and passion in their life that you've found to be most profound for you?
There's a book I read. It's cool. It's sort of a smaller book, and it's Stand Like Lincoln, Speak Like Churchill. We'll link it below, and I'll grab the author's name. I haven't read it in a long time, but it's one that I loved. It's about presence. It's about understanding how to show up in a meaningful way. And this is one that I think is interesting. So that's a book that's very tactical that I encourage people to take a look at if you do want to, fine tune the way that you speak, the way you show up, what kind of presence that you hold. Where more people are going to be saying like, oh, there's like a magnetism that comes from you, and like, what is that? That's where some of those things can be learned and how they can be absorbed. The other thing that I tell people to do all the time, reread your favorite children's book. Whatever book you loved as a kid, you shouldn't have stopped reading it. And that's a mistake that most people make. Mine is by Shel Silverstein. I love all of his work.
Yeah.
I think it was called Missing Piece.
Uh-huh.
It's like a little
Yeah.
Pac-Man kind of guy who's a missing piece that he's looking for. But I reread them, and I encourage people to reread them. And there's a reason for it. The reason is that it reignites your joy, it reignites your curiosity, it reignites this childlike part of your brain that has a belief that more is possible. And I think we all graduate out of those kind of thinkings as we get older, and the world starts to grind us down and erode us like a rock in a river. But you got to get back to that feeling of possibility. Because if you don't believe it, you're never going to get anybody else to believe it. So those are my two little hacks to really get yourself back
I
on
love
fire.
it. Two I have not heard, and I'm going to do the same. And I've got to figure out my favorite children's book. I mean, I have to go to like my first like novel that made me cry, which was Where the Red Fern Grows.
Beautiful.
Right?
An amazing book. An amazing book.
Like,
there's a lot of them.
Yeah.
And we all remember some of them. Like, Rainbow Fish.
Well,
important book. Like, there's a lot of them out there.
I was telling Marlon's teacher the other day, I don't know what the feedback was, but I was like, can I just interrupt you for a second? I did a book report on Indian in the Cupboard, and I read the whole book thinking that cupboard was cupboard. And so everything in my head, I had like, I've never seen a cupboard before, but like I had this little thing in my head as I read the whole book, and it was like it was like a little. It was like a thing for cups, right? And I'm like, why is the Indian in this small thing? And then they're like, no, it's cupboard, Chris, right? So anyways.
And by the way, that affected you because years later, we're multiple decades later from that point.
Multiple
and he's still
decades.
recovering from thinking it's cupboard. So
it's 43.
That's why revisiting some of that stuff and reigniting how you felt then.
I love that.
It's a really, really
all right, I'm going to do that. Challenge accepted. Sammy, thank you for coming from LA to the Impact Factory.
Thanks.
Now it's time for you to sign the Impact Beam.
I'm excited to sign the beam. Thanks for having me, Chris.
You rock.
Onward and upward, friend.
Awesome.